you guys, welcome back to Meaningful Motivations with Tracy Erickson. And of course, if you are new to this channel, welcome. My name is Tracy Erickson, and this is Palmistry video number 11. And so in this episode of Palmistry, I'm going to be talking about the mountains on the palm of your hand and how each of the mountains represent a different aspect of your psychology based on its planetary ruler. So stay tuned. Many years ago, in ancient India, palmists actually named the different parts of the palm after the sun, the moon, and the 5 visible planets that you could see, which are Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So in today's video, I want to talk about all of these different planetary areas of the palm of your hand and what it can actually reveal about yourself and others. I like to think of the planets as spheres of consciousness. And so each of these planets or spheres of consciousness are going to bring their own characteristics and urges to the table. So the planets are similar in astrology as they are in palmistry, because each of the planets are representing different psychological urges that are within your character. So these psychological urges represent the mental and emotional areas of your life. So in this video, we'll be going over the mounts of the hand. And keep in mind that some of these areas are more like valleys on some hands than they are mounts. But these mounts are the areas that divide the hand into these different characteristics represented by the planets. Let's start with the mount of Jupiter. So the Jupiter finger is your index finger, and so it's the mound right below your index finger, which is going to represent the mount of Jupiter. So this mound is going to represent the areas of expansion of your consciousness, of optimism, and even of the home life in some ways as well. This part of your hand is also highly associated with your own confidence. So if you have a well-developed mound of Jupiter that isn't too large, then you are very balanced in those areas of your life. Now, if your mound is lacking under the Jupiter finger, then that just means that you may have some low self-confidence, and that may be something that you need to consciously work on in your life. Now, some people have an overextended mount of Jupiter, and generally that would be shown on someone who has a lot of arrogance. So it's like the self-confidence has gone to the other extreme where they're kind of lost in their own egotism and pride. So the mount of Jupiter is going to represent those areas of your life that have a lot to do with your confidence, your internal motivation towards expansion, and optimism. And the Saturn mount, the mount of Saturn, is right under the Saturn finger, which is your middle finger. And so it's the mount just below the middle finger. So the mount of Saturn is all about like working within the limitations of the earthly world, really. So this is about, rules and fear and things like that. Now, this mount also represents your personal security and things like just working for necessity and keeping a roof over your head. So if someone has a well-developed mound of Saturn, then the mount of Saturn that is very well developed could represent someone who will have a lot of success in business. But sometimes it could also be success in politics or religion as well, as those are just working within the limitations of society. Now, if that part of the hand is very shallow or a little underdeveloped, then that could just mean that the person could be rather materialistic, rather than, expanding that to something higher than materialism. So their success in business might be more in alignment with the greed energy rather than that of expansion and growth. The Mount of Apollo is located just under the Apollo finger, which is your ring finger. So the Mount of Apollo is formed right under the ring finger, and Apollo means the sun. So this particular mount is representing the things that are associated with the characteristics of the sun. So that would be, your source of will and of self-motivation. This is also going to be about art, music, creativity, and pleasure. So someone with a well-formed Mount of Apollo is going to be a very creative person, and someone who might even be very sensual and connected with those things that bring pleasure and joy into life. And you're also very self-motivated and able to direct yourself to a life of purpose. Someone with a shallow or underdeveloped Mount of Apollo might represent someone who's more like a sourpuss type of individual. So maybe someone who doesn't really let loose and give in to their pleasures very often. The Mount of Mercury is located just under the finger of Mercury. So just under your pinky finger will be the Mount of Mercury. So the Mount of Mercury is really going to show a lot of information regarding how this person communicates. And this can also reveal health or the desire to be a spiritual healer or use non-traditional forms of healing. So if you have a well-developed Mount of Mercury, then you can easily communicate your thoughts and ideas with other people. And you can easily assimilate the information that you take in from others. Now, if you have an underdeveloped Mount of Mercury, then it's kind of like Mercury being in retrograde, where the communications just get crossed sometimes, and sometimes you may even have a little trouble actually using your reasoning and logic to think things through over your emotions. The Mount of Venus is located on the thumb side, lower portion of the hand, just under your thumb. So the planet Venus represents passion, plenty, and sensuality. But this is also representing family life and love and relationships. So if you have a very well-developed Mount of Venus, then that might mean that you're also a very sexy person, or at least a very passionate person who is very passionate about things. It would also mean that you're very sociable and friendly and very compassionate towards other people as well. The very defined Mount of Venus could also represent worldly success in general, because it is the planet of plenty. Now, if you have a very flat Mount of Venus, then that would just represent that you're not so much like a family-oriented type of person, and you may be the type of person who actually prefers to live alone. The Mount of Luna is on the opposite side of the hand than the Mount of Venus. So on the outer side of the hand, this fleshy pad over here is the Mount of Luna. So the planet that Luna is representing is the moon. And so the moon is going to be tied to your creativity and your intuition. So someone who has a very prominent Mount of Luna could be very intuitive as well as creative. And of course, someone with a more flat Mount or smaller, shallow Mount of Luna might be someone who doesn't really possess much intuition or creativity in the way that they express themselves. The planet Mars is represented in 3 different areas on the palm of your hand. So you have on this side, the thumb side, the area that is just above the thumb is representing the lower Mars. And then across the hand on this side, just above the Mount of Luna, is going to be upper Mars. And this area in the middle is called the plane of Mars. The planet Mars is really the aggressive planet. So this planet is all about courage, as well as connecting to the need or desire to take action towards something in your life. Now, this can also represent your survival and how you are when it comes to being in a group of people. So, to begin speaking on these three areas of Mars, we're going to go up here into the lower Mars, which is just above your thumb. And the lower Mars is going to be well developed in someone who is like a Boy Scout or some type of cadet in their childhood. Someone with a well-developed lower Mars might also still be in the military as an adult. So this is someone who can work well in kind of a group environment and someone who does well with following the directions of leaders. So someone without a very prominent lower Mars will be someone who really doesn't want to join any kind of group or, other type of team activity because they would likely just rather do it alone. The Mount of Upper Mars is on the outer edge of the hand, located just above the Mount of Luna. So, someone with a very prominent Upper Mars mount would usually represent someone who's connected to being courageous and who can stand up for themselves. Someone with a prominent mount of Upper Mars is not easily taken by surprise in any way. And generally, people who wear uniform for a living will have a very prominent Upper Mars area. The plane of Mars, again, is the area in the middle of the palm, where a lot of your palmistry stories come together and are told. Now, if your plane of Mars is generally pretty flat, then that's normal. Then you're not very selfish or greedy and stingy. It's just a very balanced plane of Mars. Now, if your plane of Mars is very hollow and goes inward quite a bit, then that might mean that you have a certain type of attitude towards other people. Either you don't give enough to others, or you feel as though you give too much to the point of being taken advantage of if you have a very hollow plane of Mars. When it comes to these planetary mounts on your hand, there can be lines, there can be freckles, there can be calluses and other markings on each of these mounts. So it's just important to use your intuition and discernment as you take a look at the different lines and markings on each of these different mounts. For instance, if you see lines that form a square on a certain mount, then that could represent a way that you've learned to shield yourself from disappointment in that particular area. And then other certain lines could represent just a lot of life experience when it comes to that particular area. So as you take a look at your hands, it's just going to be important for you to really factor in all the different markings, all the different shapes, as well as the inconsistencies such as calluses, warts, and scars. A lot of times you will find calluses on someone's mounds just below the fingers because a lot of times calluses just represent someone who is very hardworking or even someone who has to use their hands in order to make a living. But there are times where a callus forms on one of the mounts and it's with no other physical reason, such as physical labor or, working too hard with your hands. So for instance, on my right hand, these three fingers have a very hard callus. So it's kind of like a shell of thick skin. But that was caused by playing my guitar, because I've been learning to play and doing a lot of practice, which has caused these calluses to form. So that's an example of, a callus being formed through some type of work or repeated action with that hand. But on my other hand, on my left hand, just below my Apollo finger, I do have a callus formed on my Mount of Apollo. So if you have a callus that has no real physical reason for being there, then that would represent kind of a hardening of the temperament that has to do with the characteristic of that planet where the callus is located. Well, that about wraps it up for this video. So if you like this video, be sure to click that like button and share this video with all your friends out there. And of course, if you're a viewer but not yet a subscriber, I am inviting you now to click subscribe down below. And once you have subscribed, you can turn on the notifications bell if you would like to be notified each and every time I upload a new video. Thank you guys so much for watching and spending your time with me. I love you. And I'll see you next time. Bye.